TJ. TJ, go ahead.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. This is Gold, Guns and Instability, Transnational Organized Crime in East Africa. Your moderator today is Halkano Wario, Regional Organized Crime Observatory Coordinator for ENACT ISS. For our online audience, please keep your microphones and cameras turned off during the event. Should you have any questions, kindly use the chat function on your Zoom application. The questions and comments will be sent to the moderator. To access the chat function, kindly scroll to the bottom of your Zoom application. Click on the chat button and a chat box will appear. Should you wish to raise your hand, kindly click on the reactions button to access the raised hand function. We will evaluate this event using a poll. The evaluation is completely anonymous and it helps us to present better events in the future. Kindly do take a moment to complete it. It will be launched following the presentations portion for today's event. Please note that since this is a public event being broadcast live on YouTube, Chatham House rule does not apply. You may be quoted without your express permission. As we wait for the final online participants to connect their audio, we kindly remind you to please keep your microphones muted and your cameras turned off until we reach the Q&A portion for today. This is Gold, Guns and Instability, Transnational Organized Crime in East Africa. Halkano, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning once more. Good morning. Habari zenu. It's a very chilly morning today. It's not, probably we are hoping that the sun is going to rise, but we are extremely glad to have you here. Today, we are honored to have a discussion around the current and emerging transnational organized crime in East Africa. My name is Halkano Wario. I'm the regional coordinator for ENACT program. ENACT is enhancing Africa's response to transnational organized crime in Africa. So I work with ISS, and I'm going to be your host today and moderating this discussion. We are extremely glad to have a highly qualified and informative presentations on the question of current and emerging transnational organized crime in East Africa. So we have two sessions today. The first session, there'll be opening remark from Mr. Louis Day, who is the project manager, EU regional team for East and Southern Africa. Thereafter, we shall have an online presentation from Kouassi Yeboua, the senior researcher at African Futures and Innovation Program, ISS Pretoria. Then we shall have a presentation from Rumbi Matamba, analyst for East and Southern Africa Observatory for Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. And she will look at the organized crime index, probably reflecting on the emerging trends and observation that one can have over time as far as TOCs are concerned in the region. Thereafter, we shall have about 10 minutes of break for discussions and questions shall be collected both from the audience here in person as well as online. In the second session, we shall have presentation from Willis Okumu, senior researcher in ENACT program here in Nairobi, Tadesse Metekia, senior researcher in ENACT program Addis Ababa. And then we shall have presentation from Jacqueline, joining us from Uganda Police in Kampala. The last presentation will be focusing on elections and violence in Kenya, and this will be done by Ken Opala, who is an analyst with GI TOC. Before I hand over to Louis Day, EU Commission representative in the region, I wish to acknowledge and welcome a number of organizations that are in this room. Among, of course, our partners, the European Union, their representation from Interpol, East African Police Chiefs, Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, the Norwegian Embassy. We really appreciate your support. We are also expecting participation from a number of research think tanks in Nairobi. I see my colleague and friend, long-term friend, Dr. Hassan Kanenje. Please just raise your hand up over there. Then Kipra, one of government's leading research think tanks that does analysis around governance and politics and economy, is also here in the room. We also have representation from the National Crime Research Center, Dr. Mutuma Ututere here. There are a number of people who are supposed to be here in person but have are joining us virtually. and among them Vocal Kenya, University of Nairobi, Kenyatta University. There are two also units from the police that deals with TOC, the Serious Crime Unit, and the Transnational Organized Crime Unit that are hoping to join us. CRIPS will also join us. And finally, we want to welcome also a number of online partners and stakeholders that are part of stakeholders in transnational organized crime research, women in action, network members, which is part of the Interpol initiative. Now, I will hand over without much ado to Louis Day to give us opening remark. Thank you. Please kindly, let's clap and welcome our chief opening remark person.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Louis Day. I'm a program manager for the European Union's Global Threats and Challenges Program, which is a foreign policy initiative of the European Union. I'm based here in the delegation of the European Union in Nairobi. And on behalf of the delegation, I'd like to welcome you for those coming from outside Kenya as well. So ENACT is a project that is dedicated to enhancing Africa's response to transnational organized crime. The project was initiated in 2017, so it's now in its 7th year, and indeed its 2nd phase. And it's implemented by the Institute for Security Studies in partnership with Interpol and the Global Initiative for Transnational Organized Crime. The project provides an evidence base on transnational organized crime through research and supports Africa's key practitioner and policy stakeholders from the state, regional entities, academia, and civil society through capacity building and technical assistance. ENACT's Organized Crime Index from 2021 indicates that countries that score highest in criminal markets are also those that are affected by armed conflict. So awareness of the intersection between conflict, instability, and organized crime is critical to a deeper understanding of how this plays out in the Eastern African context. East Africa is reeling from civil war in Sudan, a shaky peace deal in Ethiopia, al-Shabaab attacks in Somalia in response to a counteroffensive against the terror group, various humanitarian crises that have displaced millions, rising costs of living have also slowed regional economies and heightened state fragility. These developments undermine political leadership and governance and may embolden organized crime networks and corrupt government officials to expand their activities across the region. A core concern in understanding criminal markets in Africa is the role of empirical data that can inform policy and practical interventions of diverse state and non-state actors. The need for greater dissemination of findings to various stakeholders for interventions is more urgent than ever. There are greater interlinkages between these armed groups and criminal organizations in Eastern Africa, where groups work together to consolidate financing, recruitment of fighters, and the illicit exploitation of natural resources. Given that there has been an increase in armed groups in Africa, exploitation of porous borders by organized criminal groups and interventions such as conflict prevention and resolution have become more complex to implement. Increasing complexities of criminal market convergences, transnational organized actors, and networks in the region call for robust bilateral and multilateral coordination for state actors and partners, and emphasize the critical role of regional and continental frameworks to tackling emerging illicit markets that sustain transnational organized crimes in Eastern Africa. In this regard, while looking at past research, it's also important to examine what the future holds for the Horn and East Africa and chart a common workable approach. This event is important to building on ENACT's work in the region. Understanding organized criminality and its emergent impact on regional economies, security, and stability will help stakeholders to enhance their responses. The European Union remains committed to supporting the important work of enhancing the response on transnational organized crime in this region and across Africa. So I would also add that I'm very pleased that this seminar is going to be followed by a partners meeting of the project where future actions will be discussed and decided on. And also to mention that the EU, as I said before, has been supporting ENACT for 7 years now, but our intention is to continue to do so in the future. And we're currently discussing a follow-up project to follow on from ENACT 2. So ENACT 3, or maybe we'll have another more exciting title for it. But we're very pleased and very proud to continue to work with the ENACT partners moving ahead in the future. So I wish you all a very constructive seminar, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I will call upon Kouassi Yeboua from Africa Future Initiative and Innovation to present in about 10 minutes or so. Thank you. To you, Kouassi.
Okay. Thank you very
much.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Thank you.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much. The African Future Innovation Program is a program based in the Institute for Security Studies, and we conduct a long-term forecasting on the issue related to African development to assist African policymakers in their strategic planning. Generally, our forecast horizon is 2043, which marks the end of the third 10-year implementation plan of the African Union Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. So my presentation this morning is to briefly show some key trends in socioeconomic indicators in East Africa. So for the purpose of this presentation, East Africa comprises countries such as Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Uganda and Kenya. Let's say EGAT countries. And in these countries, we have Djibouti and Kenya that are classified as lower middle income countries, while the rest are low income countries. So quickly, let's look at the demographic structure in East Africa. East Africa has a very youthful population. If you look at the structure here, the population under the age of, the size of the population under the age of 15 is in blue color, and orange is the population, the working age population between 15 and 64, and the population above 65 is the gray color, which is very small, accounted for about 3% of the population. But the large share of East African population is the working age population, 15-64, account to about 58% of the total population, while the under 15 15 population is account for about 39% of the population. But when you look at the forecast going forward, the working age population also is forecast to increase to about 63% by 2043, which is very huge. And this large or growing labor force can push or can lead to demographic dividend if East African countries can provide better education as well as job creation. Without better education and job creation for this growing labor force, the demographic dividend can be turned into demographic bomb, because many people in this working age group may be in poverty, potentially creating frustration, social tension, conflict, or even crime, as we say. And there's also an important aspect of the demographic East African demographic structure, which is the youth bulge. Youth bulge is the share of the population aged between 15 and 29 in the total adult population. When we look at the chart here, it shows that the youth bulge in East Africa is very large. It was about 51% in 1990. slightly declined to 49% in 2019, and currently is forecast to decline to 39%, which is still very high. So a large, huge bulge, although can be positive, can push to youth activists or positive political change in the country, but also can increase the likelihood of criminal violence, social instability, or conflict, especially if their need is not met, such as employment, education, and other social needs. So, for example, let's look at the level of governance, overview of governance. Overall, governance level is very low in many East African countries, especially Somalia, Eritrea, and South Sudan, that are classified having one of the worst governance in Africa, according to Mo Ibrahim Governance Index. So governance can be conceptualized along 3 dimensions: security, capacity, and inclusion. Security here measure the probability of intrastate conflict and general level of risk, while capacity is related to governance revenue, corruption, governance effectiveness, and other aspects, while inclusion measure the level of democracy and gender empowerment. When we look at the trend here, we see that overall, the level of the score is between 0 and 1. So the higher the score, the better the performance. And we can see that the level or the performance of East Africa in all the 3 dimensions is low. It's low. When you look at government capacity, the ability to provide service to the population, the score is even below 0.3 out of 1, which is very low. And also the security, the probability of intrastate war and a general level of risk. We know that insecurity characterizes many East African countries such as Somalia, South Sudan, and currently now also what is going on in Sudan. So the general level of governance in East Africa, in many East African countries, is very low. And going forward, it's forecast to improve, but not much, as we can see on the graph. And let's look at the situation of education. So the weak or the low level of this country's ability to provide a service to their population also is reflected in the low level of education, stock of education in East Africa. When we look at this pyramid, education distribution by age and gender, you see that when you look at the adult population, is dominated by the population with no education or even incomplete primary. Look at the brown color. When you look at the brown area, is the population without education, the adult population without education or incomplete primary education. So it accounts for the large share of adult population in East Africa. When we look at the dark blue here, which is the population that are completed through tertiary education, which is important for human capital formation. It is very marginal in East Africa. So this low level of stock of education is a threat to long-run economic growth in the region. At the same time, many studies also have shown that low level of education or absence of education is an important determinant of crime. So this low level education is alarming in the region. And we can also look at the situation of the economy. This chart also shows the trend in the size of East African economy. It has significantly improved over the past 2 decades, from about 73 billion in 1990 to 260 billion in 2019 before the pandemic. And it is comparable to the size of Algeria economy. The whole East African economy is comparable to the size of Algerian economy, and it accounts for about.
Yeboua, there's a bit of connectivity issue, so we've been having breaks in your presentation. Kindly sum it up in 1 minute or so that at least I can project the slides from my side quickly, just as a way of informing the audience, both online and offline, about the key things that you're presenting.
Okay. Oh, okay. So if you can look at the GDP per capita of the region also has improved. Can you hear me?
Yes, Yeboua, it's been breaking a little bit, and we are having a hard time following the presentation. Kindly sum it up in the next 2 minutes, and then we see what we can do as a remedy.
Okay.
If you can still hear me.
Yes. Okay. So I was talking about the trend in GDP per capita in the region, which also has improved, and currently is about 2,400 per purchasing power parity, and it's forecast to almost double by 2043. But Djibouti has the largest GDP per capita in the region, followed by Kenya. So we see how this positive growth prospect will affect poverty reduction in the region. When we look at
kindly just stop sharing, then we will find a way of addressing the issue. Right.
Okay.
Before I welcome Rumbi to present, so I will quickly I think we will immediately go to Rumbi's presentation. We will find a way of addressing the break in the internet connectivity. So I'll welcome Rumbi Matamba from Global Initiative Against Organized Crime. She will present on the indexes that looks at transnational organized crime in East Africa and Africa itself. So I'll share her screen quickly, and then she can come over here. Please kindly welcome Rumbi. Rumbi, your audience.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As introduced, my name is Rumbi Matamba. I am from the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. And today I will be presenting on trends in criminality and resilience in East Africa, drawing on findings from our 2021 Organized Crime Index. So just to start us off, I'd like to just explain a little bit on what the index is, just so we familiarize ourselves with what the index is. So firstly, the index first came about as a tool for assessing organized crime in Africa. So looking at all 54 countries on the continent. So as you'll see on the screen in front of you, we've had 2 iterations of the Africa Organized Crime Index so far. The first one, starting in 2019, drew on data from 2018, and the development of this index followed a multi-stage iterative process where we consulted over 120 experts. And then secondly, we had the 2021 Organized Crime Index. Now this captures the evolution of criminality on the continent during the year of 2020. So this is when we had the COVID-19 pandemic. So what the 2021 index does is it captures the evolution of criminality during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then what will come next is the 2023 iteration of the index. And in moving forward, we will continue to publish the Organized Crime Index every 2 years. And this way, we're looking forward to having the 2023 Organized Crime Index, which will hopefully capture the evolution of criminality on the continent and allow us to see some of the longer term trends in relation to criminality and resilience post the COVID-19 pandemic. So just really quickly, the objectives of the Organized Crime Index, I'm just waiting for the screen to move over. There we go. So the primary aim of the index was to serve as a catalyst for constructive dialogue on the issue of organized crime on the continent. And this is what we'll be doing throughout the course of the different engagements today. In addition to measuring the results of criminality and resilience, The tool aims to guide policymaking by understanding the causality and interrelationships between the different indicators. So ultimately promoting this evidence-based research and analysis, and Louis Day touched upon this when he made his opening remarks. Finally, the value of the tool will grow over time. So as we go, so at the moment, we have up to 6 years worth of data on criminality and resilience on the continent. But over time, the index will eventually also develop a predictive function, which is, if you could get to what Kouassi was trying to present on earlier on, to allow this predictive function of criminality and African futures trends on the continent. So just to familiarize ourselves with the index components, what you'll see in front of you is that the index, again, not only measures organized crime on the continent, but also resilience. So what's on the slide in front of you and what is found within the last 2 iterations of the index. And just a reminder that we have copies of the index on the table that's right at the front, which you are free to grab. But criminality is depicted by a criminality pyramid, which evaluates 2 components. So it evaluates the scope and scale of 10 criminal markets, as well as 4 criminal actor types. And then resilience, on the other hand, is depicted by this blue resilience wall. And then just in terms of criminality, just to go into a little depth on the criminality components, which will come up soon. So for the 10 criminal markets, each is a standalone indicator, but these can generally be grouped into 4 categories. So we have the trade-based markets, and this would include criminal markets such as arms trafficking. We have the people-based markets, and this would include criminal markets such as human trafficking and human smuggling. We have the drug markets, and then we also have the environmental crime markets. And then just in terms of criminal actors, we have 4 criminal actor typologies which have been developed in the iteration of the index. So firstly, we have criminal networks, and these are looser, less hierarchical criminal actor, entrepreneur actor types. We have mafia style groups, which would be more hierarchical in style, and these would typically have a known leader and have a structure that they follow. And then we have mafia style groups. Sorry, that's what I've just touched upon. We have foreign criminal actors, and then we have state embedded actors. And state embedded actors are actors which operate from or within the state apparatus. And then just moving on to resilience, and it will catch up to me. But in terms of resilience, the resilience is depicted by this pyramid, it's depicted by this blue resilience wall. And you can see that each of the resilience indicators are standalone indicators. But again, just like with criminality, they can also be grouped generally into about 3 categories. So in terms of resilience, the categories that we would have, which reflect the different parts of society that are engaged in responding to organized crime, would include leadership and governance indicators. We also have criminal justice and security indicators, and then we have the economic and financial indicators, as well as civil society and social protection measures. And then just really quickly, so that when you engage with the index, you're familiar with what's happening within it. We have these scoring thresholds. So for criminality, looking both at criminal actors and criminal markets, the index is evaluated on a scale of 1 to 10. So for criminality, 10 would be the ideal situation, showing that either a criminal market or criminal actor is non-existent in a country or on a continent. And then 10, on the other hand, would be the least ideal position, which shows the severe influence of an actor or a criminal market indicator. And then in terms of resilience, now that scale of 1 to 10 is flipped, in the sense that 1 for resilience would be negative, because it shows that a resilience measure is not present in a country. And then 10 would be the ideal situation, which would show that a particular resilience measure is highly effective in a country. So we'll move on now to look at the index results for 2021, looking at East Africa in particular. So just in terms of criminality on the continent, what we found between 2019 and 2021 is that criminality has, on average, increased within the East African region. And the increase in criminality here is mostly due to the growing influence of criminal markets. So the prevalence of criminal markets within the region, as opposed to the influence of criminal actors in the region. And then just in terms of resilience, East Africa is one of the 2 regions on the continent whose overall resilience to organized crime has improved, albeit marginally, but the point is that it has improved, which is good for us to hear in the room today. And then just to go in depth on criminal markets, what we find in the 2021 index is that the most distinct changes were observed in notable economic hubs in the East African region. And these notable economic hubs include countries such as Kenya and Tanzania, whose criminality scores increased. So Kenya was the country whose criminality score increased the most in the region, and then the second most on the entire continent. So this is between the years 2019 and 2021. By contrast, however, Somalia is the only state in the region to record a significant decline in criminality. And you will be able to see that on the screen in front of you, where Kenya shows that upward trend in criminality. And then you'll see with Somalia, there is that downward trend, so just a decrease in criminality. And then in terms of resilience, only 3 countries saw their resilience scores go down, Ethiopia most notably. And then just in terms of the resilience indicators, while victim and witness support as well as prevention improved the most, on average, unfortunately, non-state actors declined in their score. And non-state actors was the only resilience indicator that fell almost consistently across the continent and across all the countries in the region as well, which is quite disappointing news given the fact that a lot of us in the room today work within this civil society field. And then just to go a little more into depth in terms of the peace and criminality nexus, and Louis made this point earlier on when he made his opening remarks. What we find is that in terms of correlation, conflict and instability was linked to higher levels of criminality. And so the correlation between criminality and the Global Peace Index shows that there is a strong correlation between conflict as well as criminality. So in other words, the less peaceful a country is, the more likely it is to be gripped with high levels of organized crime. However, on the other scale of that, we have the peace resilience nexus, which the slide in front of you would show that the more peaceful a country is, so that is the inverse of the slide before, the more peaceful a country is, there is a highly likelihood that it would have more resilience. And so this is just more in general terms. So just to conclude here, in looking at the 2023 index and how we will go forward in terms of this project, what you will see in front of you is the development process of the index. Again, as mentioned earlier, you have this multi-staged iterative development process. And at each process, we consulted over 400 experts for the 2023 Organized Crime Index. So at this point, we are in the process of finalizing this 2023 Organized Crime Index, which will be published in November of this year. So the 2023 Organized Crime Index will be different in that it will be expanded in scope. So you must be familiar with this pyramid by now, but what is different is that whereas earlier I showed you 4 criminal actor types, which make up the top of that pyramid, now we have 5 criminal actor types. So we've now included private sector actors. And then just in terms of the criminal markets, you'll see that there's an expansion there when the screen comes back on, but we've added 5 new criminal. Oh, that's been on. Yeah. So now we've added 5 new criminal, additional criminal indicators, and the addition of these new criminal indicators is that we hope that we'll be able to truly reflect real world criminality and resilience conditions, but also capture criminality in countries that don't traditionally have these 10 original criminal markets that we initially looked at. So the expansion will cover new criminal markets such as cyber-dependent crimes as well as financial crimes. And then just to conclude here, I'd just like to encourage you to firstly grab a copy of the index, but also engage with our online platform. And the online platform is important in the sense that eventually you'll be able to see this predictive function where when you hover over a country, you'll be able to see how that country has developed since 2019 until present day. So I will stop here. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Rumbi. The role of empirical data in understanding criminal market is very crucial for state and non-state actors in the region. And I guess all the stakeholders in this room agree with us, with you, that such data can form basis for interventions that can help us tailor how we go about addressing the problem of transnationality of crimes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'll welcome you to shoot questions to Rumbi. You can ask questions to also Louis about his opening remark. And also if there are questions that could be directed towards Kouassi, we shall do that. So I'll first collect a series of questions from the in-person audience and also be able to address some of the questions that are being raised by our online audience. Dr. Mutumarutere from the Kenya, and you say your name and your institution, and we are highly welcome to network with us immediately after we are done with this session.
Thank you, Halkano, and thank you all the presenters, and congratulations to ISS and ENACT. This very interesting index. I'm mentioning the index because that's where my question is heading to. Thank you very much, Rumbi, for the presentation. I'm curious as to why the explanation for why criminality in Kenya increased in the period. Forgive me because I haven't read the index, probably the explanation is there. Because also intuitive, I mean, also your other your other statement, there's a correlation between conflict and criminality. The more greater conflicts, the more incidents of criminality. So how would you explain Somalia? And if you contrast that with Kenya, which actually where criminality increased within the same period. Thank you.
Yeah, this is on. Thank you so much for your question. I think what we found in our evaluation in terms of Kenya in particular was the growth in certain criminal markets. So we had an increase, we saw an increase in certain criminal markets such as arms trafficking, for example. We saw also an increase in the more people-based markets such as human trafficking, human smuggling, and then also just an increase in pervasiveness of state-embedded actors. So those indicators sort of pushed up the score for criminality in Kenya in particular. And then in terms of that, just this noted, albeit marginal, but noted decline in criminality in Somalia, that could be a range of factors, just because because this tool is evaluating each country on 10 criminal markets as well as 4 criminal actor type indicators. It could either be one of the criminal market indicators or one of the criminal actors which would have declined, albeit marginally, in its score. So just to reiterate that decline in Somalia wasn't a significant decline, it was a very marginal decline. But in terms of how we present the tool, it is still registered as a decline in criminality.
So there's a question from our online participant, and the question here is, thank you for presentation. Is there a way you can expand this project to include other regions of Africa as transnational organized crime undermines development and peaceful growth of Africa? I believe the person will not be aware that the ENACT program actually covers the entire African continent. The other question is, why is there an increase in criminal market? What are the state and non-state actors not doing? And probably I can throw in my own, if you allow me, the audience, is the last 2 years has also seen criminality markets grow. There's this ongoing crisis in Sudan between two functions of the military. There was, war for months in Ethiopia, in the Tigray region. The economic slum in the region has also made food and fuel prices go up, and this resurgence of extremism in Somalia itself. These all have immense impact on criminality. What do we anticipate to see in the 2023 index with regard to this? Thank you. Is there a quick question also? I think there are a couple of questions I'll collect. Go ahead. We'll collect all the questions and then you respond. And then thereafter, you make very brief responses so that we can have the next session starting.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having this opportunity to be with you here. My question goes to, I'm Dr. Sunday Okello. I sit as an advisory to the ENACT project. I'm asking Rumbi, on your last slide, where you compared there is Ethiopia and Egypt. You try to unpack a little bit and explain to us what exactly you're trying to explain to us in your slide. What is it that you're trying to really study between Ethiopia and Egypt? My other question also goes to you. What contribution did COVID play in the 2019, 2020 to 2021 in as far as organized crime is concerned? Because I know the increase on crime in Kenya sharply increased during this period of COVID, and the numbers also increased from the coastal to Nairobi and other parts of Kenya. So can you explain if there is some kind of correlation between COVID-19 lockdown and organized crime during this period that contributed to the figures in the increase? Thank you.
Okay, and then Benis afterwards, and then Halkano, and then who else?
Well, good morning. My name is Luca Byung Paul. I am from Southern Sudan, and by becoming connected with ENACT through my work with the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Yes, I want to echo first. Thank you very much. And I'm one of the people who managed to use in the Africa Center when I was the dean, how to use such an evidence to articulate the challenges facing Africa. And I think it is a high work that we may need to really to amplify, and I think we have a lot of, so I just want to appreciate. And I appreciate very much also you have included the cyber security, because it's one of the biggest domain, and I think I'm so happy that you managed to include. We'll have some more discussion on that. But before, my question is really about gathering the information in an environment that is characterized as quite challenging. It would be good if you could highlight some of the challenges of the researchers conducting such a research in such a difficult environment. The second question which I could like you to push you, the quadrant, especially in East Africa, the low resilience and the low criminality and the low resilience. And the other quadrant is the low resilience and high criminality, which seem to be the quadrant that is encompassing most of the East Africa. It would be good to see what are the opportunities for this quadrant, given the fact that we are talking about the East Africa. Maybe my last question is about the dissemination. Again, it is so important. Maybe we discuss it at a certain point, because it's one thing having evidence, is another thing, can you be able to influence the policies? Maybe this is an area we may need to highlight so much on the linking the research to the policy. Thank you very much.
Benis, in 1 minute, both Halkano and Benis. And then, yeah, we be done, and then Rumbi and can respond in 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Banis. We implement programs targeting people who use drugs, and I'm also a drug policy consultant. And 3 years, we have conducted research in the drug market survey. And so I just want to confirm what I've seen here in East Africa, that yes, the levels of criminality has gone up, because even as when we were outside there looking at, when we did in 2019, then we did another one in 2022, and we were looking at the number of people who are selling drugs and also the number of people who are using, there's a very high increase. And even if you look at the NACADA survey, definitely the people who are using drugs have gone up. That means there's presence of sellers. However, I just want to ask, ENACT is really doing a good job, and I've worked with ENACT for quite some time, but how is all this research feeding into policy change? Because for us right now, we work with members of parliament, we are thinking of how are we going to change policy in line, especially for communities that are affected by these levels of crime. Thank you very much.
There's a question over there. All right. And we are running. Okay. I'll kind of go ahead 1 minute.
Okay. My question goes to Rumbi. Since you are collecting a large volume of data in 7 IGAD countries, how do you handle misinformation during this misinformation age?
The last question.
Thank you. My name is Kimari. I'm from the Center for Human Rights and Policy Studies in Nairobi. My question is again about, it's just about the resilience indicators. So I'll just look at the fact you brought about non-state actors, and I wanted if you could break that down more. What kind of services are they not providing? What kind of engagement is lacking? Is there a shift in the power dynamics? That sort of thing. And then I also wanted to see, I think it's really good empirical data what we've covered here, but I also wanted to see whether we can tease out a little more about the community impact and the community vulnerability, so that the data seems a lot more fed to the people and a lot more about what's actually happening and the real life experiences, rather than measures that we can get wrong now and then.
Okay, Rumbi, you have so much to answer, and I pity I'm not in your position right now to do it, but you have very few minutes to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all the questions. It's very encouraging for us as the ENACT team to see such engagement with the tool. And this is what we were hoping for when we were working on the tool and publishing it as well. So really quickly, in terms of methodology, what are some of the challenges in evidence gathering? One of them has been raised, misinformation. And so because this is an expert-led assessment, what we do is try to get as many rounds of assessments as possible. And then in the end, we have what we call expert group meetings, where we have regional and thematic experts sitting in and looking at what some of those results are. And so hopefully that allows us to limit the amount of misinformation that comes. So this is an expert-led assessment led by experts on these topics. And so the hope is that experts would know exactly what they're talking about. And what we have found so far, just in terms of misinformation, is that we haven't been able to pick up any misinformation within the tool itself. So not to boast too much, but we have been quite careful in collating information that is as accurate as possible. And we do this through the different rounds of iterations, with the different rounds of engagement with different experts. And then just in terms of the question on dissemination of some of the index results, this present event that we're in is one of the ways that we aim to disseminate some of the key findings of the index. But in addition to that, we've also engaged with states. So as ENACT, we have regional organized crime observatories in different parts of the continent. So we have Halkano here, who works in the Eastern Africa Observatory, and they've also engaged with governments on how governments can build their resilience against organized crime. So that's some of the ways that we disseminate our results. And then this is also beneath one of the ways we hope to feed into policy by engaging with key stakeholders on what we have found. Because also the other thing is there is that contestation that there isn't enough information on different key markets. So what we hope to do with the index is to provide the information so that there is research that is giving numbers where numbers are needed to be able to inform this policy. Why the increase in criminal markets in 2021? an array of reasons, but what we found in the results between 2019 and 2021 is that COVID-19 did little to disrupt the criminality within the region and on the continent as a whole. So I guess this speaks to the resilience of organized criminal markets as well as criminal actors within the continent. And this is a call for all of us to engage more effectively in building resilience against organized crime. I think that should, the question on comparisons between Ethiopia on the last slide, a lot of those were fictional numbers just to show you the comparability effect of the index as a tool. So what you'll be able to see when you engage with the website is that you'll be able to compare one country against the other. So I wasn't trying to make a point on the actual results themselves, but to make the point that this is something that you can do within the tool on the website. And I think that's all of them. Oh, so sorry. There was a quick question on states, on non-state actors. Just a correction there that the issue isn't that non-state actors aren't doing enough. What we found during the COVID-19 pandemic was this sort of stifling of non-state actor voices. So you have civil society, the media being limited in what they can speak on in terms of just not only COVID-19, but also organized crime. So we found that non-state actors reduced because their work was impeded upon by either states or state-embedded actors. So it's not what civil society is not doing, it's what's being done to civil society to stifle their voices and their work.
Okay. One of the reasons why we brought all research think tanks, universities, and other partners here is for us to network after and to coordinate our engagement around addressing the issue of transnational organized crime using empirical data. So Rumbi will be, you can shoot some of the answers even afterwards. So I'll give Louis 1 minute as we call in the next panelist to come on board. Could say something if you want.
Oh. Okay, well, I'd like to thank both presenters for their interventions. Rumbi, you didn't really give us a taste of the forthcoming. So you were talking more about the 2021 Africa Organized Crime Index, but the new version is coming out in October, is it? November. So we're all very excited to see how these trends have developed and what progress there has been or what lack of progress. And I think there will be a big presentation of this in the coming months. So just to close also by saying that really you were talking about how this, so on the side of the EU, of course, it is also very important for us. This is a program that, as I said, is not a development cooperation program. It's a program that is, if you like, in the interests of the foreign policy of the EU. So I said I work for something called the Global Threats and Challenges Program. And within that, we have something called the Global Illicit Flows Program, which is ENACT is part of. And it is very important also for us to be informed, because to be informed enables you to then develop coherent policies and then be able to implement them cogently and rationally. And the granular research that ENACT, the ENACT project provides, an analysis, can inform countries, of course, and can inform, as has been described, all the actors, but also us. And we're increasingly looking at how to integrate or combine the analysis, the research produced by ENACT with our own initiatives within the external, not only the external foreign policy framework of the EU, but also combining it with our internal priorities. There is something called the European Multidisciplinary Platform against Transnational Organized Crime, impact, which devises initiatives to, if you like, protect the EU from external threats. And increasingly we're looking to the ENACT project to also provide us with support in that regard. So that was just a short mention of my thoughts. Thank you again. And I think we're closing this session now. Was there a break? Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Let's put our hands together for the presenters, both Kouassi and our two honored presenters over here once more. Thank you. I will call upon Willis, and I will ask also Tadesse to prepare online and Ken to prepare online. We shall have a much more shorter time at the moment, so I'm kindly asking Willis to join us as the two other presenters leave the podium. Thank you so much, Rumbi. Thank you, Louis. So in the next session, we shall have presentation from Willis Okumu, ENACT Nairobi, Tadesse Metekia, ENACT Addis Ababa, and we shall have also presentation from Jacqueline from Uganda Police and Ken Opala from GI TOC here in Kenya. So without much ado, I will allow Willis to come on board, and you have about 7 minutes only. So, and you're a good friend of mine, so I still have to stick with these timelines. Let me get this one, isn't it? Yeah. So, can the online audience see this?
So good morning, welcome to all our partners and colleagues to Nairobi. My name is Willis Okumu. This presentation is based on the work that we have been doing in partnership with IOM. So it's on Lake Victoria, transnational organized crimes in Lake Victoria. And as you know, that Lake Victoria is a shared resource between Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And this project is actually funded by the US government. And this project came about sometimes last year. It is based on countering transnational organized crimes on Victoria in the 3 countries. And I work with another colleague of mine. And the purpose is basically to assess the nature of TOC on Lake Victoria and also to look at issues of border governance. So Lake Victoria is a huge transport corridor. Kenya happens to just share about 6% of the surface area of the lake. The massive, more than half of it is actually in Tanzania, and about 43% in Uganda. Rwanda and Burundi have 0, but they have catchment areas that are also very, very important to the lake basin. It is very, very significant for the economy of the region in terms of hydropower to Uganda, massive source of fish export for all the 3 countries, a reservoir for water for industrial, commercial, and domestic use, a medium for transport. Before 1977, we had ships going from Kisumu to Jinja and also to places like Musoma and Mwanza. But today we have ships, cargo ships traveling across the lake, but also boats and a few passenger vessels moving across. There's a lot of biodiversity in the lake, animals, plants, apes, and birds, but also very, very important for modulating our climate. In terms of what we're looking at in TOC, for a very, very long time, the lake has been neglected by the 3 governments, and that has resulted into the creation of geographies of crime, areas where other actors congregate to commit various levels of crimes. For example, In 2017, the UPDF Hello. So the UPDF basically rescued 30 children from one of the islands in Uganda called Buvuma. And that basically shows that there's a bit of organization for commission of terror activities within the lake, and that has an impact for national and regional security in East Africa. Another place that we are looking at very keenly is another island within the lake called Goziba or Nabuyongo, as an avenue for a lot of other things: illicit sex trade, marijuana trade, trade in counterfeit goods. And we found that in this particular island, there are several people coming from places like DRC, Burundi, some from even West Africa that are congregating here for all sorts of illegalities. One of the other islands that we're looking at is Remba. Remba is in Migori County in Kenya, as a place where there's open level of marijuana trade, as you can see in the picture. But one of the other things that is also very, very important, and it's also a very big concern for us in the region, is the IUU fishing within the Lake Victoria. We are talking about use of illegal fishing lines, gill nets, sign nets, cast nets, the use of poison, the use of dynamite, the capture of fish or mature fish, fishing in restricted areas and marine areas. And one of the most important things that we have written about recently is the use of, or is the illegal illicit trade now in Nile perch swim bladders that is causing a lot of depletion in the lake, especially for the Nile perch. The other thing that we are looking at is child trafficking, especially to the mines. A lot of children coming from Tanzania to work in Western Kenya, especially in Migori County. The other thing that we are also very keen on is issues of pollution. River Kagera in Tanzania basically discharging 50 tons of solid waste on Lake Victoria every other day. Again, pollution. In 2021, we had 360 million tilapia dying in the lake, costing about 10 million euros. And basically, this basically means that in terms of TOC, Lake Victoria as a transport corridor, as an area that has been neglected by governments for a very, very long time, has basically become an avenue for the commission of various levels of crime. And this is basically just a snapshot of some of the things that we're looking at. Thank you, Halkano.
Thank you so much for this brief presentation. I'm sure there are a couple of questions that are going to be raised based on that. But before that, I will welcome Tadesse. Tadesse, are you in the house to make a presentation about transnational organized crime from the Ethiopian ENACT office? Tadesse.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm ready. Let me share my screen.
We'll wait a few seconds and then it's coming up probably. Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah. It should be there now.
Right. This just go ahead and present as you can send us. You can share the screen quickly as you share this. Okay, it's coming up. Yes. There we go. They say go ahead. The screen is shared. Make it full screen. Tadesse, unmute. Tadesse, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me now? Shall I continue?
Yes, we can hear you. Kindly go ahead and present.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Make it full screen.
Briefly about transitions to organized crimes, the case of Ethiopia. So, as you all know, Ethiopia is in a transitional process since 2018. Then with an armed violence and instability in different parts of the country, and a peace deal last year, and again we seem to be back to some kind of armed conflict in other parts of the country yet. So is there a link to this organized between transitions in Ethiopia and organized crimes? The ENACT project has been trying research on this topic. Is my screen moving, Halkano? I don't see it moving.
Not yet. Just continue to present. There's a lag between the internet speed and your voice, so but just continue.
Okay, thank you. So ENACT has is engaged in a research project with myself and a GI talk colleague is going to start on the relationship between organized crime and transitional environments. So for the Ethiopian part, essentially the point is whether the transition in Ethiopia has created for organized criminal actors to perpetrate organized crimes. And I have been trying to conduct preliminary kind of investigation into this, and we have some indicators that organized in Ethiopia has been enabled by the state of transition. There are new forms of organized crimes, including illicit trafficking in gold, which has become very common in Ethiopia, and also ransom, with the involvement of armed groups in different parts of the country, and also the increase in drug trafficking, human trafficking, and illicit coffee trade, and the smuggling of migrants. We are also looking at new actors recently, especially for foreign actors, Chinese actors, in areas of illicit gold trade, and also armed groups involvement in different forms of crimes and state to the extent that new. And there is a growing culture of impunity. So because of the transitional context, due to the instability and conflict, the law enforcement agencies here in Ethiopia are preoccupied handling the most pressing issues, crimes related to the war and the instability. Then the response to organized crimes has been overlooked, and the criminal justice system has become more of reactive, which acts to investigations when victims complain about a certain organized crime. Then even the involvement of state-embedded actors has also created a challenge in terms of effective prosecution of organized crimes when there's an evidence. So as some of my interviews with senior prosecutors in Addis Ababa, they told me that whenever the investigation path leads to high-ranking public officials, then they often discontinue the investigation and the prosecution process. And though I can respond to questions later on due to the time limitation. So what does this mean for the region, for the Eastern African region? So we have to look at Ethiopia as a country that shares borders with 6 of the other 7 IGAD members, and these borders are mostly porous, and which also enables the movement of crimes and criminal groups across these borders. And also, again, when we talk about Ethiopia, we are talking about the country with almost close to half of the Eastern African population living in Ethiopia. So about 126 million people out of 300 million people in the IGAD region live in Ethiopia. This definitely has a huge implication unless the growing trend in transnational organized crimes in Ethiopia has some sort of solution. Thank you so much. I will respond to the questions, if any.
Thank you so much, Tadesse. There's been a bit of disruption from the internet connection, but we get the gist of your presentation. I will call upon now Jacqueline from the Uganda Police to present, and to address the problem of connectivity. I'll share the screen from my side, and you put your camera off so that at least your connectivity becomes better. So Jacqueline will present about gun violence in Uganda and address the whole issue of trafficking, arms trafficking in Uganda. So I will share your screen from this side, and then you shall be able to present directly, and I'll be able to go through the slides as you give me cues to go to the next one. Jacqueline, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
1 minute, I load your screen, and then you should be able to see from your side. Once you see, you can go ahead.
Okay, I'm ready.
Do you see the screen?
Yes, please.
So you put your camera off just to enhance your connectivity, and then you can continue. So Jacqueline's presentation is, Jacqueline Nyakana is going to present about gun violence in Uganda, assessing transnational organized crime dimension. She's the Superintendent of Police, Deputy Head of Crime Investigation Analysis Unit, Uganda. Please go ahead, Jacqueline.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm a Superintendent of Police, Nyakana Jacqueline, and I'm Deputy Head Crime Intelligence Analysis Unit. This unit, of which I will be referring to as the CIAU, was established in 2018 with the support of Interpol and the project ENACT. And the purpose was to produce both operational and strategic analysis on gun violence and firearms trafficking, among other crimes, not only those ones. So Crime Intelligence Analysis Unit insights support Uganda Police Force to proactively prevent transnational organized crime. Some cases of gun violence are transnational and organized crimes in nature. So today I'm going to present the trend on transnational organized crime dimension of gun violence in Uganda. So let's go on the next, okay, you're already there. Transnational organized, transnational dimension factors of crime, of these crimes are the presence of porous borders between Uganda and her neighboring countries, that is Kenya, RDC, and DRC, and South Sudan. So that's the flow of illegal arms which are detected from other countries, and its link to other types of crimes such as cattle raids, terrorism, aggravated robberies, among others, and that murders does not exclude it. Let's go to the next one, please. So when we look at the trend of gun violence in Uganda, we mostly focused on cattle raids in Karamoja region because it registers always the high cases due to the presence of illegal guns in the hands of hostile warriors engaged in cattle raids. And in most cases, pastoralists and security personnel are killed while others get injured during the shooting. The next slide, please. So when we look at December and August and December in 2022, due to heavy downpour, which flooded most areas, thus hindering the movement of rustlers, the cases were not that much. But when we go to 2023, in the previous slide, the cases were high March, April, and May due to the massive raids by the Turkana warriors from Kenya, who earlier on had crossed to spy in Karamoja region under the guise of grazing cattle during the drought season. Let's go to the next one, please. So when we look at the actors involved in the gun violence in Uganda, we have cattle rustlers, who are the warriors, both inland and abroad. Then we also have the robbers. They also access these guns. We have rebels who are active in Uganda and both abroad, that is in DRC Congo, and also in our north, which is South Sudan. We also have terrorists who are the actors, and other errant security personnel from various security agencies. Let's go to the next one, please. The types of guns which are mostly used in this gun violence, we have PK. PK is mostly used by the terrorists, the ones who can access such guns. Then these other crimes, which are robberies, cattle raiders, and murderers, then the shootings, they are mostly using the small arms like AK-47, SMG, SRA, and pistols. Let's go to the next one. Next one, please. Yes. So when we look at the area that has been mostly affected, the area in yellow, those are the areas that have been mostly affected by gun violence, and also being the neighbors of the countries, the DRC, Congo, and the South Sudan, then Kenya, that is also the same as the illicit flow of firearms. So in DRC, they only come in to attack, and they come in to attack, they kill security personnel and abduct locals. Then in South Sudan, we have the toposters who come to just exchange. They do barter trade of guns and maybe some foods, because sometimes they have famine up there, and they exchange the guns. Then sometimes they come in Kidepo National Park to do to hunt, and in the process, they kill like our rangers and the guns are taken, but the security personnel there have been harmed. So when we look at the Kenyan side, we have the Turkanas and the Troposas who sneak in with guns and exchange with the warriors. Then they also, on another hand, they come to kill and attack the security personnel. In the process, they get their guns. Let's go to the next page, please. When we look at the victims of this gun violence crime, we have the pastoralists, especially in the northeast of Uganda, and also the security personnel are always the victims of this in both areas, even in the central where robberies are very common. Then the motorcyclists also are always attacked so that they can rob maybe their motorcycles. They also attack the highway travelers, especially those who travel at night. Then business communities, that is shopkeepers and mobile money operators, etc. We also have financial institutions like banks who are always victims of these guns. Let's go to the next one, please. So the drivers of crime, usually, it's the proliferation of firearms. It is accessed and it is increased. The fact that we also have the porous borders, that's where most of them come through. Then we have the inadequate supervision of personnel. When we talk about security personnel who are being attacked, we don't rule out the private security organizations. These ones are always attacked by robbers when they are on guard, and their guns are taken to be used for robberies. Then we also have accessibility of guns by criminals through those different ways that I have just described. Next, please. Next. Okay, in the conclusion, yes, we are going to the conclusion. Gun violence and firearm trafficking remains a challenge in East African region, but it can be tamed if we continue to strengthen cooperation amongst different security agencies and neighboring countries. The project ENACT has really helped us to create this unit, and it really does a lot. So crime intelligence analysis unit reports will continue to give insights into specific types of transnational and organized crimes in Uganda. This provides understanding and analysis to enable police officers and decision makers to plan the suitable responses. Thank you so much for your attention, please. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for this presentation. Thank you so much. I'll call upon now the last presenter, Ken Opala from Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. He's an analyst for Eastern Southern Africa Observatory. Ken, I will share your screen, and then you shall be able to, I shall be able to control the slides from my side. Ken is going to speak about our elections here in Kenya. And as you know, there's been quite, it's usually a moment of tension, and the aspect around organized crime usually picks up more during the time of elections. So Ken will speak about this in a few minutes. So Ken, be ready. I'm sharing the screen.
Good. Hamjambo.
Jambo. I can say on behalf of the rest of us, yeah. They have said
Jambo. This presentation is based on a paper we did months ago, that published months ago, on elections and gangs in Kenya. So as you can see, I'm saying that the 2022 poll wasn't business as usual. And the question is, why do I say that election 2022 wasn't business as usual? This is because despite the negative prediction, the elections were relatively less violent compared to the past. Of course, there were a few incidents of violence here and there. In fact, these elections, the 2002 elections that were said to be peaceful, this election is more can be compared to 202 elections in terms of the peace that was seen. And as I can say, this must have been since the reintroduction of multipartyism in 1991. This election can be said to have been relatively peaceful. I will later in the presentation tell you why last year's election turned out to be peaceful and less violent despite the negative predictions. But first, let me give you a background on how criminal groups are embedded in the country's politics and election. As you can see on the screen, election violence remains a major problem in this country. In fact, the closer Kenya gets to the polls, the more gangs seem to reappear. I think Halkano, you've jumped one.
Which slide?
You've jumped one slide, isn't it?
The next one?
Yes. No, the first first slide. No, that's the second slide. That's the second slide.
Right. Okay.
Slide. Yeah. So as you can see, election violence remains a major problem in this country. And the closer Kenya gets to the polls, the more gangs seem to reappear. These gangs are involved in the political incitement, hate speech, ethnic hostility, and hooliganism. And of course, this explains why past elections outcomes have been heavily disputed in and out of court. For instance, in 2017 elections, the presidential outcome was annulled and fresh elections held. The results of 35 of countries, 47 governors' positions were challenged in court. So were 98 of Kenya's 290 parliamentary seats. And most of the claims were related to vote stealing and election violence. Next slide, please, Halkano. As you can see in the first map on the right, almost the entire country was affected by the transition from one-party rule to multipartyism. The first slide shows, the first map shows the areas that were hit by elections in 1992. And the second shows 207 election. The 207 election was a watershed in terms of violence. So the first map, you can see that almost the entire country was affected by the transition from one-party rule to multipartyism. That's why there was so much violence. And the second one shows a few regions that were affected. And the explanation is that in 1992, the stakes were extremely high. And here, because almost all ethnic communities were laying claim to the presidency. Things later changed, of course, as a few communities now dominated presidential politics and the landscape of presidential politics, as the map on the right shows. In 1992 or in 1992, virtually every ethnic community wanted to take the presidency. And as we moved on, and it becomes a bit difficult, and 2 tribes or 3 tribes now dominated the landscape. So you can see there was of course, 207 was very violent, but the areas that were scarred by violence were few compared to 1991. Next slide, please. So let me speak about the issue of politics and gang crime. Politicians create or finance violent groups, organized criminal gangs, and ethnic political party militias to propel them to power. These criminal groups are used to provide security as private bodyguards during campaigns, zone off areas, some areas into exclusive voting blocks, mobilize crowds, staff ballot boxes, disrupt rallies, threaten, assassinate opponents or election officials, impersonate absentee voters, contest results, heckle rivals, bribe voters, etc. And they also used to fiscally disrupt polling. So 9 out of 10 organized criminal gangs in Kenya are involved in politics, directly or indirectly, or are funded or founded by politicians. Directly meaning they are formed for the purpose of influencing elections, indirectly meaning that political crime is part of their repertoire. And 90% of gang activities relate to politics. Next slide, please. As you can see from the figures, the number of organized criminal gangs has kept skirting since the first time the government banned such groups in 2002. The National Crime and Research Center at one time identified 423 groups, criminal groups in just 23 counties, 5 years ago. Had the study covered the entire country, we would be talking about maybe 1,000 of such groupings, and I'm happy that Rutere, who's from the Crimes Center, is here with us. And here I'm not talking about vigilantes or just small groups. No, these are criminal gangs with hundreds of members as rank and file. So why do they numbers keep skyrocketing? It's to do with the high unemployment, state failure to be impartial in guaranteeing personal security, and increased monetization of politics and elections. Next slide, please. The maps, the two maps show jurisdictions controlled by various organized criminal gangs in Nairobi and Mombasa. Incidentally, these are areas that have continuously suffered election violence. In Nairobi, we have Kibera, Kamukunji, Embakasi, and Dagoretti. In Mombasa, as you can see from the map, you have Kisauni, Likoni, Nyali, and many others. So there's a correlation between gang violence and election violence in our country, or the activities of gangs and elections in Kenya. Next slide, please.
Ken, are you there?
Sorry?
Go ahead.
As we moved into 2022 election, there was so much fears are widespread over the elections. And why were there so much fears? One is because of the history. Trends indicate the elections where the incumbent 6 to 10 seats are deadliest. We are talking about 1992, 2007, and 2017. And of course, last year, Uhuru was retiring. So the expectation was that the election will be so violent. And even before the elections, the then Interior Minister and police and other state institutions had forewarned about the reemergence of organized gangs and militia out to perpetrate violent acts. And just February, about 6 months to elections, the National Cohesion and Election Commission mapped out election hotspots. And as you can see on the map, as you can see, the areas were Singishu, Lamu, Nairobi, Mombasa, Nakuru, Kericho displayed prominently. And these are known to be traditional hotspots for election violence in Kenya. So why do I say that the 2002 election wasn't business as usual? And of course, a number of reasons. I think next slide, please, Halkano. One, we're talking about the new constitution, which was considered to be the best thing that happened in Kenya in decades. It didn't just provide a new form of governance that has spread power and authority through devolution. Even it has helped authorities come up with a new electoral regime in terms of laws, regulations, and practices. And this has deterred violence. And second, the attempt by the ICC, that's the International Criminal Court, to prosecute a number of notable Kenyans over the 2007 elections seems to have deterred warlords. Now, those responsible for instigating the violence prefer to be viewed as spontaneous response to allegedly rigged election rather than as a premeditated, well-planned, and organized attack. These other things about the new arrangement, political arrangement, where there are coalitions. And in the past, of course, there have been coalitions, but there's a new framework that came up recently, where that I mean, previously we have had coalitions, but they crumbled very easily over mistrust, power sharing, resource sharing, and of course they lacked watertight mechanism of resolving issues. But now the parties can reach out to former rivals for support. You recall Jubilee backing the ODM, former Azimio Umoja, Kenya, recently. So criminal gangs allied to political parties and individual politicians seemed uncertain how to operate within this changing political environment, which seemed to discourage political warlords from creating exclusive tribal voting blocks. Like in the past, last year's election was mostly about issues. It was less about politics of personalities that attract ethnic-based militia and gangs. You remember Ruto advocated for the bottoms-up economic model, while Raila promoted social welfare and free healthcare. This, to some extent, helped to do away with the hostile politics of ethnicity that traditionally polarize the country and results in violence. And then again, Kenya was well prepared this time around. Security operators were better prepared. There was training, deploying. There was deploying more. There was a deployment of more law enforcement and security officers to electoral hotspots ahead of the elections. And authorities were very quick to respond to any signs of possible violence, gang mobilization, and election threats countrywide. And then the other one is that the new constitution provides the position of county governors. And this seems to have taken away some of the ethnic sentimentalism or capitalism that previously hit on the presidency. So ethnic warlords can now take refuge in county governor if there are no prospects for presidency. Next slide, please.
Can summarize the last few ones? Thank you.
Sure. This was a forecast. Let's not forget that gangs are subdued but still around and about. So they keep, as long as we have unemployment, the state cannot be partial in providing personal security, and this increased monetization of politics, we still have a threat still there. There's also this issue of re-election. Again, we can see that there's so much activity around re-election as early as now, and this is not good because re-election politics seem to be the deadliest in this country. So what's the way forward? What remains to be done? It's good for us to link electoral violence to organized crime. In the past, organized election violence has been seen as petty offense, robbery violence, but it's important to link it to organized crime. We need to set up an independent tribunal into gangs. I think that's the second. That's a new slide. Halkano, sorry. Halkano, slide. Next slide. Yeah, we need to set up an independent tribunal into gangs and election violence. In 2008, the Commission of Inquiry into Post-Election Violence recommended a special tribunal to be established to prosecute election-related crimes. This didn't happen. I mean, it's important that we do this. And we need to erect and enforce campaign financing regime. It's very important. So Parliament and IBC, the Independent and Partners Commission, should move fast and erect and enforce campaign financing regime. Last slide, please, Halkano. So in conclusion, although the activities of organized criminal gangs and militias were muted in last election, violence continues to pose a danger to Kenya's democracy. Limiting violence in 2027 election will depend on continued government focus to disrupt the organizational, operational, and funding structures of these gangs and militia, as well as prosecuting their leaders and political financiers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you. Now I will welcome plenary discussion from the presenters, and I welcome questions both from the online audience and the audience here in person. And if there are questions directed towards Tadesse or Jacqueline or Ken or Willis, please kindly just state to whom you direct the question to. Fascinating for me, I think, were these different but interrelated questions that, okay, Faye first. We'll collect series of questions and then we'll come back.
Thank you very much. My thanks to the colleagues who presented this very, very informative thing. Yeah, and I quite enjoyed it. But I don't know whether it's a question I have or even a statement. I'm studying TOCs across Africa. There are a lot of trends and a lot of things that actually disturb me particularly. And I was just speaking to my colleague here in Kenya, and I'm looking at the board there, and you can see that so many of these groups have been banned. But what does it really mean in practice? You ban a criminal group around the neighborhood, they coalesce and they change and they go somewhere else. I mean, what's the effect of banning? You ban a name or you sanction the individuals? What do you actually do? And many times we focus on analyzing, researching the problem. I've always said, I mean, can't we have a creative way? Probably this is the question, and this collectively for all of us. Can't we have a collective way of addressing some of these typical issues? And I've been speaking to some of my colleagues even on this table. You look at Kigali, Rwanda. Many of these problems they don't have. And the question is why? Can we learn from what Paul Kagame is doing in Rwanda? And so we have in some of these countries, I come from West Africa, and it's prevalent across the sub-region. And so the question I have is, what is the solution, apart from us doing research and saying these things are there?
Good. The question is directed to Ken. What does really banning mean? For instance, when the US says we've sanctioned these leaders of this group or this group, there are financial sanctions that come onto that. There's freezing of accounts. What do we mean by banning, Ken? And then the other question directed to all the presenters is, are we only addressing the problem all the time without looking at solution? Thank you, Faye. Another question from Morris.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Maina Morris from the Norwegian Embassy, and I have a question and reflection, one to Okumu. You mentioned the issue around Lake Victoria, and I'm curious about what devolution or the impact of devolution is on reversing some of the marginalization that you mentioned is a big challenge in how that resource is managed. But generally to all the presenters today who have done a great job in this discussion, one is, what is the impact of regional organizations and networks in addressing transnational crime and criminality, especially right now in Sudan? I mean, are there resilience mechanisms in this region providing the necessary support that humanitarian actors need to reach the people who are most in distress? My sense is this mechanism are in place when they are needed most. And right now for Sudan and Somalia and the entire region that are facing conflict, this is the time we need to see some of these mechanisms step up. Is that actually happening? And just to borrow from what my brother has just mentioned about being creative, are there any experiences or examples of states learning from each other on best practices on combating transnational crime and issues of terrorism and peace? Thank you.
The second question about what can we learn from each other, I'm directing it to Jacqueline. Please, what can we learn from Uganda's experience in addressing transnational crime? We're still collecting questions. Venice, let us be very brief. Okay, Venice, go ahead.
My question is direct, Ken. Did he look at the connection between the gang violence during elections and drugs? Thank you.
Ken, were there investigation between drug usage and election gangs in Kenya? Dr. Mutuma?
Thank you, Halkano, and thank you to all the presenters. Thank you, Ken, for always very engaging analysis and presentation. It's a comment, and the comment is, it's a comment disguised as a question. Looking at the terminologies and the concepts, gangs, militias, all these groups. Is it time to call for a conceptual reflection within the community of researchers working on these issues, on exactly where does a gang begin, where does a gang end, where does a militia begin, where does a political youth wing that spontaneously and sometimes engages in criminality begins? It's not restricted to your presentation, but the kind of a bit of conceptual confusion in the wider field that is involved in the studies of these particular groups. So your comment really on that would be quite useful. Thank you.
Ken, that is to you, but also Willis can respond, and Tadesse can also reflect. We throw around, or we talk about actors with labels. For instance, there's the gangs during election, transnational criminals, insurgents. How do we go about conceptualizing this? So, and any other question from, okay, Dire?
Yes, my name is Dire Dika. I come from KIPRA. KIPRA is Kenya Institute of Public Policy Research and Analysis. And my question goes to Ken. After the 2022 election, we've experienced mandamanos in the name of high cost of living, and we had even a lot of fatalities. So do you link these mandamanos with the election 2022? I would like to know that.
Mandamanos, for people who are not Kenyans, are our public protests. Usually they are announced by the right-wing honorable, the former Prime Minister, Raila Odinga's coalition called ODM. And we are lucky that there is no mandamano today. Otherwise, none of you will be living here. And they are not necessarily very violent. So, okay. And then Eric.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Eric Kyoko, a lecturer at Kenyatta University, a social anthropologist. My question concerns the last presentation. If gangs are for hire, and the people hiring them are actually politicians, then where do we go from here? Is it a country of gangs all the way from the state to the local level? What policy what policy directions then we have to come up with? And who makes these policies? Should we invite people from outside to assist? Or how do we go from here? Thanks.
Okay, those are a couple of questions. I think we'll start with Willis, and then we shall go to Ken. We have a lot of questions for you, then Jacqueline, and then Tadesse. Very brief responses.
Okay, thank you, Halkano. Maurice, you're talking about the impact of devolution on TOCs. It's in regards to Lake Victoria, I can tell you that devolution has created a confusion. So Homa Bay, for example, is now the leading county in terms of lake fish-related TOCs in this country. And that is because of several reasons. One, the reporting lines between different fisheries officers is very confusing. Okay. Number two, as it is, the beach management units, the BMUs that are supposed to manage fisheries at the local level, they're basically becoming politicians, and they're more powerful than the local fisheries officer that is posted there. Number three, the Fisheries Act that we have been operating with is suspended by a court in Malindi. So devolution in many ways has created a mess in terms of reporting lines. And therefore, in regards to fisheries crimes, the fishermen are actually taking advantage. So you find people coming in and investing in a boat, for fisheries. Within 1 year, they have 100 of those boats registered to one BMU. So that's the problem. The other question you're asking, Maurice, is on the role of regional organizations. Specifically in regards to the lake, we have two very active ones, Lake Basin Commission, which is a body of the EAC. Then we also have the Lake Victoria's Fisheries Organization, which is also a body of the EAC. Their mandates are very limited in terms of dealing with issues of TOC. Lake Victoria Fisheries Commission is doing research and giving policy advisory to the EAC on issues of fisheries. That is what they do, and they do reports every other time. Lake Basin Commission is on development issues. So in terms of what is happening in the lake, what levels of crime so is involved, they can talk about it to you and me, but in terms of action, they don't have teeth on that. Okay. So the other question is on, and who defines, from Dr. Mutuma, who defines these actors? A lot of times actors are defined by the environment where they operate. So for example, if you go to Busia and you see people running with bicycles across the border from back to forth, you know, and if you engage them, you realize that they're doing smuggling. So the environment within which they operate is a factor in determining, you know, how we as researchers would call them. I think I'll leave it there, Halkano.
There was a question from Lichetu Likaka. He's asking how is technology impacting on organized crime around like Victoria. Just half a minute answer to that.
Okay, from my good friend Dr. Lichetu, technology. So a lot of times we see activities that are coordinated from elsewhere but are happening in the lake. People are sending money for all sorts of purposes via M-Pesa on the lake. There's a lot of recruitment of people that now we are even seeing online of young women that are going to some of these islands, and most of them are promised all sorts of jobs, you know, and most of the time they have met their contacts on Facebook via WhatsApp and all that. So that is also bringing in a lot of illicit movement within the lake. Thank you.
Can kindly respond to the questions that were directed to you, and there are quite a number, but be very brief, 2 minutes.
Sure, there are quite a number. The first one was the issue of banning. Yeah, is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, the first one was on the issue of banning. Banning doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, I know Kenya's in the last 20 years, Kenya has moved 3 times to ban criminal gangs. There was 10 in 2002, and then there were about 3 that were banned in 2010. Then about
Kenya breaking.
Sorry. So banning doesn't make sense because you cannot ban what was not lawful. How do you? I mean, these gangs don't have a registry of members, they don't have officers. How do you then ban? It doesn't make sense anyway. So banning doesn't make sense. Why does this issue of gang violence continue? And why is it that it cannot be nabbed? I think focus has been on the rank and file, and financiers have got scot-free. Those prosecuted, arrested, are always the rank and file, the foot soldiers, and not the financiers. I think we should now focus on the financiers of these groupings. And there was a question about whether my study looked at the connection between election gang violence and drugs. No, I didn't look at that. We talked about terminology. We are very right. I think we need to move to we need to come up and come up with better terms for these groupings, because there are various types. As at now, I think the groupings or terminologies are based or classification are based on activities, their numbers, and the extent of violence and how they were created. But I think we need to, as you say, we need to really look at the classification. This is very important. The issue of Mandamano, I didn't want to link Mandamano to election violence because there's been some shift there's continuous shift in the objective of the Mandamanos. One is about the servers. 2, it's about cost of living. So I really don't understand. So that's why I didn't want to mention the issue of Mandamano or street protest.
Next, I will call upon Tadesse to respond to any of the questions that were raised in 1 minute, and then thereafter Jacqueline shall be done with this. And then there are a couple of questions that have been again raised online, but we shall raise them at the end of it all. Tadesse?
Yes, thank you, Halkano. I I wanted to reflect on the question regarding learning from each other and the role of regional organizations, which is very important, and it is essentially what transnational organized crimes imply. Like, they are transnational, they are cross-border. So their problem and the solution is not to be found and limited only in one state, and that means learning from each other, taking best practices is important, and also the role of regional organizations such as IGAD, such as EABCO is going to be very significant, and this is what ENACT has been doing in the past. The approach it follows is more of a regional research to inform regional interventions through these organizations, such as the research we conducted on Karamoja involving Kenya, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Uganda. So providing this regional organization with evidence-based and actionable recommendation is ENACT's approach, and I think this is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacqueline, in 1 minute, please kindly respond to any of the questions as we close the sessions.
Okay, thank you so much. When we look at what we learn from trans-organized crime is we need to, first of all, to strengthen analysis, because analysis, it guides strategic decisions and also operational in resources and everything. So it guides. So if we strengthen the analysis and also strengthen the intelligence-led policing, it's going to help us to curb this voice, because it will help us to easily identify the culprits and be put to book with the cooperation of other countries who are involved. And this at least has been really helping. In Uganda, every time, like if we have any country that is involved in some country in a crime, it's brought to book and it's brought on the round table, and they discuss and they make sure these culprits are put to book. So it's mostly cooperation and also promoting intelligence-led policing that we have to embrace every now and then. Thank you.
Jacqueline? Okay, then I think on that note, I will bring the discussion from the two sessions to an end. We had planned that we shall end by exactly 11:00. A number of people online could be also engaging in other activities almost immediately afterwards. Kindly clap for Willis and his other 3 different friends online. And one housekeeping rule, the announcement is that there is an evaluation form that has been issued to the in-person attendance. You could fill in and leave it at the registration table. And otherwise, as I bring this discussion to the end, I will wish to welcome that we use the next 20 minutes or so to make new friends, make new collaboration, make new partnership, and discuss how we can help address the issue of organized crime. And especially in this house, I'm extremely privileged to have Dr. Mutuma Rutere, who is the new director for the Kenya National Research Crime Center, which is an old research think tank that has been existing in place. But I believe under your leadership, it's going to see much more broader collaboration also with us and other members in the room. And I think we also have Glossop here. We have people from Horn Institute, Kipra. Wish to also recognize the presence of the director of CVE, this Counter Extremism and Organized Crime, Dr. Mr. Dennis Okadapao. So we have quite a number of institutions in this house, and when we are having coffee, we can have an opportunity to network and create new friendship. At this moment, I wish to thank especially the presenters. They took their time, they did the presentation despite the hiccups with the internet that we always have with those hybrid systems that we have. But aside from that, I think you did splendid work, and we want to thank you. Please kindly clap for them. And most importantly, of course, all of you online, a number of people are drawn from all diplomatic corps we have in the city here. There are participants drawn from different parts of the world in this on hybrid workshop. So we really take this moment to say thank you for your participation. We could not have addressed all the questions that we have, but we shall direct them towards the presenters as we close the session. And most importantly to you, each of you here in this room, to have struggled with the Nairobi legendary traffic, to be here, especially for people who really arrived quite early with us and did the pre-testing, the guys from Norwegian Embassy and the lady from Kipra and others. Thank you so much to you all. So I invite you now to have refreshment and use this half